welcome back to Hawaii Real, everybody. I have with me good buddy, Mike Lee. Mike, thanks for coming on. He's going to explain to you what it is he does, because he tried to explain it to me. I was like, okay, that's a ton of stuff.
Right, absolutely. Thanks, Eo. Thanks for inviting me.
But you run your own business, you run your own corporation.
Yep. Okay, so really, what I tell my friends and family is I'm a life facilitator. I really like to try to connect people to place, to time, and to each other. And in doing so, I think that on a personal level, they learn more about themselves. And I think that they can eventually become a little bit better version of who they want to be. And in terms of a professional title, I'm the owner and operator of Teamworks Interactive, which is a corporate training and team building business. And we do team building with kids as young as kindergarten, 5, 6 years old, all the way through adults in kupuna with different nonprofits or businesses. And I also do corporate training in things like management or leadership with companies like Aloha Air Cargo, the Hawaii Convention Center, things like that. So really, I am an educator, but I educate maybe in non-traditional ways in a lot of different capacities. And I've worked on a lot of different education initiatives over time. And
you've got like this great radio voice. See, like the deep, I can hear it on the headphones too. You probably hear it when it comes out.
Oh, excellent. I've been told that on the phone. When I used to work for Payless Shoes in college, people would say, hey, you've got a great phone voice. You ever think about being a telemarketer? And so there was a time when I was younger where I was a telemarketer in Oregon for 2 days before I quit. Only job I ever quit.
Why did you quit after 2 days? It was just like phone call, phone call, phone call, phone call.
It was unlike anything I'd ever done. And I don't mean to judge. It was extremely difficult. And I was able to get my old job at Payless back instead.
Yay! Selling women's shoes is better than telemarketing?
At one point, I did know the difference between a Mary Jane and a pump. And that's where I learned that a clutch purse was a purse you could clutch.
Oh, yeah. I didn't learn that until like maybe 5, 6 years ago.
Yeah. These are the things you learn.
Terrible. Clutch purses, people. All right. So with the pandemic and the shutdown of all the schools and stuff, what have you been up to?
Okay. So, because of the pandemic and because of the nature of my business, I work, personally and interpersonally with a lot of people. So business has gone down the drain in that point, in that regard. But I also had ACL surgery in late January. Mm-hmm. So I had cleared my schedule for February, March, April, May. And the rehab's going really well. But as a result, I've been hanging out a lot in my house. I live in Kailua in Aikahi. And my kids are at home with me. So I've got a 9-year-old and now an 8-year-old son who have been living with me and doing their work in school. And my wife works at home about 90% of the time. But the last few weeks, she's had to go into work a little bit. So I've been spending my time very similar to, I think, a lot of other people's.
Yeah, just chilling at home, taking care of the kids.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Where do you think this is going with the education in the future? Because I always envision that this thing might happen again, or a pandemic where they shut things down. Could happen again. Do schools start already learning how to do distance learning on a permanent basis?
I guess my feelings are you will start to see an increase in the amount of, maybe not homeschooling, but the amount of distance learning that's going on. I think until people realize that something is an option, they don't ever consider it as an option. People usually want to read a review on Amazon or see that something works or hear firsthand from a friend. Hey, how'd that distance learning school go? Oh, that was great. It was so good for my kid. They learned so much. I think in the short term, where education is going to move is everyone's moving towards distance learning as much as possible because of the pandemic. I also think that, again, over time, you're going to start to see people see it as an option, and people will start to choose that maybe for their kids specifically, if that's a better option. I think there's pros and cons to distance learning. And I think that every individual child is different and they have different needs. And I think we as parents, I know you've got kids as well, we as parents often do the best job we can. So if that's something that's a fit and something that works really well, it's something I think people will take a look at a little bit more in the future. And I think on the educational end, teachers were not prepared for this. If you want to say we weren't prepared for this, teachers weren't prepared for this. And I got to give a lot of credit to them, because in a week or two, people who had never done an online distance learning course were suddenly putting courses together. And so I got to give credit to all the educators out there.
Yeah, it's a real crash course for like the teachers, because they've gone through their entire careers focusing on like owning and running a classroom. And then here you are thrown into the mix where, hey, you don't have a classroom anymore. Like all your students are at home. So you have to do the same kind of things that, professors were doing on online college classes and stuff.
Right. Which a lot of them have had training for.
Right.
Or they've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
Right? You would hope.
Right. I think I mean, I heard like rumors of some teachers that didn't have like the ability to adapt. And so like their classrooms, like kids weren't doing a whole lot.
I think so. And I think that one thing that happens a lot of time in education or, in any field is we have a way of doing things a very specific way, and then change happens. And the way we adapt, I think, is really the biggest thing that we take a look at. And I'm sure that there are people who have struggled, because when you're in a classroom, the dynamics are really different. How kids learn is very different. And taking that into an online world, especially maybe for a generation that's much older than myself, that can be really difficult.
Like what happens to physical education? What happens to high school sports? Like, because you were into wrestling too, right?
I wrestled in high school. Yeah, I played some football too, but that's going to be something that's really different. I think that's an interesting question because, if you're looking at an education standpoint, where does physical education go? Physical activities. Well, PE from the health perspective, I think that can be translated a little bit easier across distance learning. I know that my kids right now have a lot of, for PE today, here's the basketball drills we want you to work on. We've been practicing basketball chapter. Here are some examples, show some videos, try this outside. Today we're going to do a Spider-Man workout of like 20 push-ups, 20 burpees, 50 squats, and we're going to rotate those. I think those translate pretty well. I think those are things that kids can do on their own or, under supervision. But I think, we love our high school sports here.
Yeah.
Because, UH is the only big university we have, and we don't have professional sports. So we're all about, hey, what high school you went? And, what teams and sports did your kids play? It's a tough one because as a wrestling coach, the safety of the athletes always comes first. I think considerations you're starting to look at is how do we open up for fall football when usually there's a summer league and these kids are getting in shape, they're getting healthy in a way that will help them in a very brutal sport that is taxing on their body. And the same goes for all sports. Are they going to move the deadline later? Are we going to be seeing football in January? I'm not really sure. But as a wrestling coach, that's something we've started to consider is, hey, how does this play out? And again, as soon as the NCAA canceled their sports and the NBA canceled their sports, that was when everything started to fall into place. So from the little that I know, coaches and athletes are trying to do what they can at home to stay in shape and to replicate what they can. But, a sport like football or wrestling would be a little bit more difficult than practicing basketball drills or tennis, for example.
Yeah. And even just like wrestling, that's a very closely, it's a physical sport where like you're closely wrapped around the other guy,
Yep.
a stranger. It's like
absolutely.
In the era of social distancing, that's completely opposite, right? Like
yeah.
You can't social distance wrestle.
There's no way. And I'm really lucky. One of my friends who's a coach, he's doing some online coaching for kids who have siblings. Mm-hmm. Now, some of these siblings are 6-7 years apart, so it's really difficult. But for the kids who are doing it, that's one way to do it. But yeah, wrestling was something that was the first to go, especially because of the way the coronavirus is transmitted. Can't have sweat and breathing and sneezing and coughing on each other. So it's, in regard to the safety of the athlete, we have to make that decision very quickly.
I mean, are they even like wrestling associations across the country talking about this?
Yeah, actually, I think it was yesterday or the day before, USA Wrestling sent out their guidelines for reopening practices. Now, they haven't even gotten to the point where the guidelines talk about having a full practice with 30 kids in a room, but they're very small incremental changes over time in terms of you may practice with a sibling, or if you know who is someone who has been safe for X amount of time, that person might be able to practice with this person following these very specific guidelines. So USA Wrestling has been looking at that. Every major event, of course, has been canceled throughout the summer. But as a winter sport, wrestling has been hoping and doing like everyone else has. They've been trying to prepare as if it is going to happen. And I got to really applaud them because they've been doing a lot of good work to do things the right way.
Yeah, one of my buddies I was talking to yesterday was telling me that his hockey rink, he's a hockey player, they finally opened up, but they don't allow games because that's violating social distance ordinances and whatnot. But they split the rink up into 3 sections, and you can have up to 8 players practicing on the ice in each of those sections. And he's going out of his mind. He's like, wait, hockey, you have 5-on-5 with 2 goalies. That's 12 guys. And here you have 8. You got 24 guys on the ice. How's that any different? How's that any better?
Interesting.
Right. You have twice as many people on the ice as you would have, in a game. Or if you have half the people on the bench and half the people on the ice, you'd have the same amount of people practicing or playing. So he was just like, that's what happens when politicians try to run sports. I was like,
You know what? It's interesting. There's politicians, there's doctors and scientists involved. I think there's so many experts at so many levels who are really trying to support and aid everyone in the country and, around the world through this pandemic. But the truth is, in my opinion, is that there are no finite answers right now, and everyone's just doing the best they can to adapt and make change. And I think a lot of policies are going to be wrong. A lot of policies are going to be correct. And it's one of those things where we're not going to know the true answers about what was right or wrong or what was more or less effective until much later down the line. But yeah, it's really interesting to consider where sports are going with all of this.
Right. So you're a coach. What would you like to see happen if you were the coach making the calls for your kids practicing? And you're a parent too, right? You're making the calls for when you send your kids back to start sports, whatever, baseball, basketball, whatever. What kind of decisions do you make as a parent and as a coach?
I guess in regards to a sport like wrestling and the way the coronavirus is transmitted, I think that's something I'm going to be a little bit more conservative on. I've got 2 boys. They're almost the same size, so I'm really lucky. They got a couple virtual practices a week, and on Sundays we get together. We do like an hour practice together. It's a little more fun and intense. But I'd really like to see, what I'd really like to see is everybody communicating clearly about what their goals are. And once decisions have been made, working together with those decisions. I think an issue we run into a lot is at the highest levels and even at the lowest levels, when a decision is being made and people are asking for input, a lot of people aren't willing to put their input in or willing to say what they need to say. And those people are oftentimes the first people to complain once a decision has been made.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that in terms of leadership, that's something that I would like to see change, or that people should always be looking at. I'm guilty of that myself, where people say, hey, what do you think about this? Or what should we be doing for this year? And sometimes maybe I'm not having a great day, or maybe I'm afraid. I'm just like a 5th grader. Sometimes I'm like, I'm not sure what my peers are going to say. I'd rather say this in private, or, but sometimes I think it should be important for people to get their voices out and voices heard, especially when the time has been allocated for that. Hey, we're working on A. We'd like to hear your concerns. We'd like to hear what you think is going to go well. And from there, really, play with that from there.
Yeah, it's like the minority of people are the vocal ones. That's for a lot of things, like politics, Facebook, you name it. It's the small amount of people that are crying the most and the loudest, and you have the majority of people who are just kind of silent.
Yeah, and I think that happens a lot socially because, when you're in the majority, generally policies, procedures, laws, whatever they might be, wrestling rules, whatever, tend to support the way things have been, the status quo, which generally supports the majority. So it is always the minority who usually, because of the perceived or real either oppression or conflict over time, or their feeling of being treated unfairly, that's going to be strongest with them. And generally, it's people who are having major conflicts who will bring a strong voice out, And I think it's funny because these things happen on the schoolyard, in elementary school. It happens in high school classrooms. It happens on college campuses. It's happening in politics and propaganda and everything where we're at today. So it's an interesting one, especially coming from Hawaii, where I learned the word minority very quickly as a child. One of my best friends, lifelong friends in 4th grade, was like, why Hawaii people are so nice? I was like, why? And he said, well, we're the minority here. And I'd never really thought about that. And he started explaining certain things to me, and I was like, oh, that's really true. And, from that moment on, I really started to take a look at the majority and the minority. And then when I went up to the mainland for college to look at, how those dynamics played out, even my kids, local kids growing up here, I asked my 4th grader, when he was in about 1st or 2nd grade, I asked him, what percentage of the United States do you think are Asian? Whether that's Southeast Asian or, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, which is the majority of the Asians that we have here. And he was like 85%. And, I started laughing. I said, oh, it's time to bust out some maps and show you some of the demographics. And he was so surprised to see that, if you look on the map, sometimes that's not even colored in for Asians.
Right. There are many places where there are no Asians.
Right. So it's just, and again, I think that's why education is important, right? Is understanding majority and minority and how those interactions and dynamics play out with each other is something that young kids can actually understand and take a look at, and that they can really, I think, digest themselves and start to form their own opinions on, of course, with guidance and understanding the realities of the world.
Yeah, I like to imagine that Hawaii kids would travel and see the rest of the country. I know with our kids, we take them, to the mainland and stuff like that for their trips. But one of the important things I wanted to implement on my kids was that this country is huge. It's massive. We've done a couple RV trips, and we did a bus trip from San Jose down to Anaheim.
Oh, wow.
And you look at a map, it's not that far.
Right.
But when you're on a bus going for 8 hours, it's like all you see is land,
Right.
mountains, farmland, you name it. And then running through cities and stuff like that. And it's just like, yeah, guys, this is how big the country is. And this is just a teeny tiny part of it.
Right.
And we're from Hawaii, where you can't drive straight for 8 hours. No. Like, you drive straight for half an hour and you're in the drink, right? So, So it was a good experience, I think, for them to see, just that smidgen of California that, the rest of the country is far larger. It takes, days to traverse it.
I think so. Absolutely. Understanding ourselves in relation to where we live and how big or small the rest of the world is, the nation. I think it gives a new perspective and a new opportunity for, anyone, regardless of age. But yeah, I try to get my kids those experiences as often as possible. But hey, living in Hawaii it's tough. It costs a lot of money, and we do the best we can, I guess. And
so Mike, we're talking off camera. You took some acting classes when you were back in college. You did a little acting. How'd you like that?
I loved it. I only took acting 101, and that was the beginning and the end of it.
Still something though.
But yeah, it's one of those. I think it's like a public speaking course for a lot of people, where here's an interesting fact. The number one thing people in America are afraid of in front of death or
public speaking
is public speaking.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, number two is failure. And I have a whole thing about that in education. But acting, you've got to get up, you've got to perform in front of other people. And that's something that people are really uncomfortable with. It was a little bit tough for me, being in college, new people,
Sure.
not knowing everyone. But I wasn't a choir as a kid. So once the lights go on and the audience is dark, for me, it's not a big deal. And I think I've always been blessed that way. I took one public speaking course in high school, and yes, I get nervous like everyone else. But for me, the point where I'm on stage, and if I believe in what I'm doing, or I think it's important, I've got no shame.
Yeah.
We talked about this off camera.
I mean, that's a big part of it, like having shame. Like once you get over that shame part,
Right.
which it's quite common here in Hawaii to talk about, hey, no shame or
Right.
shame or whatever. But once you get over that, man, it's like you release yourself to like do all kinds of stuff.
You get to be free. And I think when you're free of those inhibitions and you're no shame, right, and you do something, people get to see who you really are. And I think for me, at least, that's oftentimes where you get to learn the most about someone, or really appreciate, who and what they are, what they bring to the table, and maybe the way they do things differently than you.
Yeah, it's like, hey, I got a podcast going. Look at that. It's like,
There
hey,
you
no
go.
shame. How did you do that? You were like such a quiet kid in high school. It's like, I just got over it.
That was me. I was a
Grow
very
up.
introverted person, but if it was a class assignment to do a speech or something,
Terrified.
I was there. I could do it. But
I was terrified in high school.
Yeah. But acting 101 was fun. I met my future wife there. It is where we first made some of our first connections. And I had done a little bit of acting in middle school, but I gave that up in high school for wrestling and whatnot. But it was a nice return to, some of my roots and some of the things I enjoyed when I was younger.
All right, so we're going to tie this in a little bit here.
Okay.
You said you were asking me about my cameras and stuff like that. Yeah. You're like, hey, I want to buy my kid a camera and stuff like that. So where do you, and especially with the distance learning, acting, now you want to buy a camera, where do you see all of this tying in together in the future with kids doing distance learning and actually people working from home and doing more telecommuting? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Where you're doing, your work and stuff and your meetings and stuff via webcam or via, the internet.
Yeah. So just my personal opinion. I think we are going to see an increase in the amount of people who are able to work from home. I actually forget which company it was. It was like a week ago. But some large company, the CEO said, until further notice, we're going to let employees work from home. If you're an employer and you're paying a lot of money, from a business perspective, to have on-site places, and your workers are just as productive working at home and they're happier and they're getting their work done. If you have a business that's successful, that's one way to cut funds. But I do think with distance learning in education and with teleconferencing and whatnot, as people have been making jokes on Facebook and whatnot, I think it's true where, hey, so how many meetings a week did we really have to have, and that we all
Oh, yeah.
drove down to someone's office to have, and now we can just have these meetings a little bit quicker with a little more efficiency if we just spend a few extra minutes by email being a little bit more clear about our expectations, clarifying what the goal is, sticking to an agenda, which I think is something no one ever does. But hey, here's an agenda. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. Let's get it done. I think that would minimize the amount of face-to-face contact that we need. Now, I think that that's really important. I think that's something I value is the interpersonal face-to-face contact. But I think even after this pandemic changes or progresses, I do think you're going to slowly start to see an increase in the amount of people who are able to work from home. And I think that's also maybe a little bit related to the values that are changing.
Right. Okay. So one of my things that I've been trying to preach to people now is that your kids should be learning to do video conferencing now, because like we said, we were talking about here, you're going to be working from home. A lot of businesses are going to be working from home. They're going to have telemarketing meetings and everything. And so the big question that nobody's really asking is like, what happens when you go in for job interviews? Like those job interviews, they're going to change. The dynamic of that is going to change completely. Like you may not have to actually go to the job site because there won't be a job site. You won't have to go to the office to interview because there won't be one. So what's the alternative to that? You're going on camera and you're making yourself presentable on camera, to people. You don't even know how many people are going to be looking at you. Right. So like getting used to and getting comfortable being on camera and talking on a microphone and investing in a good camera, investing in a good microphone, because the quality of your product is not just you presenting yourself, dressing up nicely, showing up to an interview. Now it's, hey, how's your camera look? How does your lighting look? Right. How are you doing your hair? How are you doing your makeup, on camera? Because doing your makeup on camera is different from doing your makeup in person.
Yes.
So all these factors start to come into play. And with an acting background or an acting classes and stuff like that, it's like you're going to see, I envision we're going to see more of that going forward in the future. And kids today need to start learning that. And I think adults today need to start learning to, be comfortable on camera, be comfortable talking, into a microphone and doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think, with distance learning and these teleconferencing and things we're doing, we're starting to develop skill sets that we didn't need to use as often, but that we will be using more often in the future. And yeah, the quality of the equipment you have, the way you present yourself, we live in a judgmental world where we will make judgments regardless of whether or not, we talk about prejudice, right? Prejudice just means a prejudgment. There will always be an idea or association that pops in my head when you say something very specific. And if I'm going to interview a candidate and they look great and their camera isn't the greatest, it may change or impact the way that I feel if there's another candidate that has a better camera and everything seems the same between the two of them. But yeah, I think these skill sets that we are able to focus on a little bit more specifically with distance learning are preparing our kids, I think, for the future world that they're going to live in, and in many ways, the types of jobs that they're going to have as well.
Right, because you could also judge a person, hey, if I'm hiring you for like a telecommuting job where you're going to be on camera, you're going to be on your webcam, you're going to be working from home, but our meetings and everything are going to be on a webcam. And when you're meeting with customers and stuff, that's going to be on webcam. Yeah. And if you show up to that with a crappy webcam and crappy lighting and your white balance is off, it's like you didn't put in your effort to fix all of that before you even got here. I don't want your face going in front of my customers.
Right.
And there's the prejudice right there, right?
Right. It's the equivalent of, hey, like you're a retail manager. Hey, Stacy or Susie, the way you dress and the way you present yourself, in the workplace, it's, back in the day we'd say something like, maybe it's a little sloppy, or, could you at least not show up in like your t-shirt with pukas inside or whatnot. But I think it's the online equivalent, right? Like the quality and the time you spend into preparing yourself and presenting yourself in an honest way, but in a presentable way. And I think that those are just social standards that are going to start to change and elevate over time, for sure.
Because Mark Zuckerberg was going on, the owner of Facebook, and he was doing his own little podcast talk, but his white balance was completely off. And so people were making comments about that. Say, hey, you got this multi-billionaire and he can't fix his freaking white balance. And he had a bad echo and stuff. So he produced he may have really good content to talk about, and he may be, a billionaire running this, massively successful company, but he can't even film himself correctly.
And that makes a difference, right? If you're watching a YouTube video, sometimes you're watching a YouTube video and the sound's not very good, or like it's a little blurry and you're just like, I'll just go to the next video.
Yeah.
That could be an opportunity missed in real life that impacts someone in a real way.
Yeah. Can you imagine like your child's teacher talking on WebEx, like with his massive echo?
Right.
Like, that wouldn't be comfortable to listen to.
Like, Dad, I'm trying, Dad, but I can never hear him. I never understand what he's saying. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Or if he's all pixelated and stuff because he has a bad connection,
Right.
It's like, yeah, you can't see my teacher.
Yeah.
I can kind of hear him because he's cutting in and out.
During my kids' wrestling practice, sometimes where we have a little mat set up, it's really far away from the router. So sometimes they have a bad connection. And like, Dad, it was just blocky. I didn't even see what he did. Can you help us? And so those things happen. And that's reality. And in a real life work situation, hey, I just missed something. I missed something that was critical. My boss just said, okay, here's the bottom line. And here's what we're going to do about it. You missed that completely, right?
And then everybody freezes on the screen. Yep. And you're like, oh, what happened?
Right. So I think there'll be a lot of new opportunities that will benefit society in a lot of ways, but there are going to be a lot of pitfalls and problems that we have. And then, as humans, we adapt and we adjust.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how sports is going to do it.
Yeah.
Either we just, as a society, have to accept that, hey, a percentage of people are going to get sick and,
right.
But we got to go back to normal.
Can you manage everything, or what is unacceptable? Because nobody wants to answer that question when they're presented with it, right? Which is, well, what is an acceptable amount of death, right? But I think we're always looking at, the balance of the science. We were talking a little bit off camera about this, of the balance of that science and what is actually there and the evidence is there. But also the economy is important, and how over time that economy at some point is going to lead to other social issues that will lead to a lot of bad things as well.
Right.
So I'm happy that I'm a father who has to navigate through this, and a husband and a son, but I'm certainly glad that I'm not a politician or someone who's making decisions for other people right now.
Yeah. Like, I guess one of the analogies that we're throwing around was, if you want everybody to be safe to the point where we're shutting down everything because we want everybody to be safe, like what's the percentage of, acceptable sickness that we allow in society? We could take that same, point of view with like, hey, there is an acceptable rate of, injury, fatality, death, whatever, in things like driving.
Right.
Right. And people are like, oh no, well, you can't it's driving car accidents aren't contagious. I was like, no, but somebody can kill you at a moment's notice without a moment's notice, for no fault of your own. Like you could be at a stoplight.
Right.
Somebody smash into the back of you. You could be walking on the sidewalk and somebody veer off and kill you. It's nothing you can prepare for. And the only way, if we really wanted to be safe as a society and minimize that, we'd lower the speed limits to like 5 miles an hour, and we have speed bumps all over the place.
Yeah. Or if we're getting really drastic, say, hey, so let's just not drive.
Or let's just not drive. Right. Hey, let's everybody have self-driving cars.
Right.
And, don't walk on the sidewalk or put like big railings on the sidewalk,
right,
to differentiate that. We don't do that. Why? Because there is an acceptable amount of risk involved with driving, with walking on the side of the road, going bicycling.
Right. And in a lot of ways, we are complicit in that, or we're just unaware of that. But of course, with the camera and the focus on the pandemic and how it works, that's something that we're so focused on now. But you're right that it does pop up in different areas in society.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, we do have
it's a good analogy, though, because a lot of the times you get into a car accident as the result of someone else making unhealthy decisions.
Right.
But you're the collateral damage.
Right.
You're right.
Like, I've had so many, you pull people over, the cops pull people over, and, they're not wearing seatbelt or they're speeding. It's like, oh, no, I'm a good driver. It's like, okay. Or the kid's not in a car seat. No, I'm a good driver. Right. Nothing's going to happen. It's like, hey, it's not that you're a good driver. It's that there's stupid drivers out there.
Right.
So
my kid keeps telling me I'm old enough to walk across the street and down the hill to Burger King, or, to get a candy bar at Safeway. And I've actually walked behind him to make sure that he knows how to do it. And I said, it's not that I doubt that you have the ability to go from point A to point B safely. I said, but are you ready and prepared for when the dog gets hit by a car, or there's a driver who veers onto the curb? I said, I just need you to start to be aware of some of the bigger pictures before I'm really allowing you to do certain other things, right? And then it's like I'm the overarching government telling him no, you can't do this yet. But of course, it's the kids, so you try to be careful.
Yeah, because we want to make sure that they're safe.
Absolutely.
Like I remember as a kid, riding my bicycle around the neighborhood.
Yep.
like by myself, no helmet, nothing.
Yep. Skateboarding, bike riding.
My kids don't even really know how to ride bikes
Yeah.
because it's just not something we do in the neighborhood.
They're not the greatest skateboarding or anything, but man, they know how to make a movie on iMovie for
Oh my
for
God.
class,
Yeah.
right?
They can film and edit and stuff that, I didn't learn until like just, maybe a decade ago.
Yeah, in the more recent years, sure.
Yeah. The dynamic of how our children are going to live as an adult is, I don't think we can really comprehend that.
Yeah, I don't think we can prepare for it. I think a lot, just like our parents with us, right? There are so many advancements, not just in technology, but socially as well. We keep changing the way we do things that I guess you do the best you can based on the knowledge you have. And, so one of the things we do in our work, sometimes I go over corporate training, I go over different generations and maybe the types of characteristics they show in the workplace more or less and what they're better at or what they're not as good at or challenges that they might have. And the biggest indicators over how a generation is shaped is their parents' economic times and what's going on in the world, because that changes their values, and those values are what those parents, impart on their kids. So yeah, I always question, am I doing this the right way? Because what is the world really going to look like in 2040, right?
We have no idea.
Nope, no idea.
In 20 years, we have look at like the smartphone.
Oh yeah, that
10 years.
everything.
That was 10 years.
It's only, oh God, it's not
I mean,
about 10
okay,
years.
maybe 11, 12 years,
Something
but
like that.
for wide usage, 10 years.
Yep.
And we went from having almost none to like everybody and their kids having one.
Right. I had a flip phone until at least 2010. I was kind of late in the smartphone game. And at some point for work and business, I needed the ability to just be doing email and whatnot. So yeah.
I think people don't realize how fast society changes with technology. I mean,
Absolutely.
and I was just talking to my kids about this also. Just look at the Wright brothers, when they started flying in 1904, 1905, and by World War I, there were fighter planes.
Right.
And World War II, there were better fighter planes and bombers.
Yeah.
And then, by the 1960s, we were in space.
Yeah.
It's like we went from, in a span of 55 years, from not flying to flying in space.
Right. It's incredible.
And now it's just like a normal thing to fly around the world and the country.
And just like this pandemic, like, people nowadays have been saying, oh, it's like science fiction. A few months ago, I would never would have believed this.
Yeah.
People in the 1900s, people are going to try to fly. Oh, that people have been trying that for centuries. It's never going to happen, right? But in 50 years, they're in space. It's crazy.
Mike, it's been great having you on, man.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate being on. I enjoy your podcast very much, and I appreciate you reaching out, inviting me on.
All right. I don't know about the Buffalo Bills, but
Hashtag Bills Mafia. Hashtag PWP.
all right, everybody. Stay safe out there. And as always, stay happy.
Aloha. Take care.